Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to have you here for our second advocacy presentation, this one on letters to the editor. Just a quick logistics for those watching us live. There is a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. That is what we will use to ask questions of our panelists. Our hope is to be in and out around 30 minutes. So we'll have about 5-10 minutes of questions at the end. So with that, I will hand it over to Sara Damewood, the chair of our new Ignatian Advocacy Team in the parish. Sara.
Thank you, Tim. So welcome, everybody. We're pleased to have some knowledgeable panelists with us today. First of all, we have longtime parishioner Connie Widmer on our panel, and Connie has an amazing wealth of knowledge and skill on so many matters. You do, including writing letters to the editor. We also have Nicole Schmidt, who is Bread for the World's state organizer. She works with faith leaders across Ohio and Michigan to engage Congress on hunger and poverty issues. And finally, we have Mark Curnutte, who is an instructor with the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film at Miami University. An award-winning journalist, he worked for 25 years at the Cincinnati Enquirer, covering social issues of race, class, poverty, homelessness, and immigration. So first of all, Nicole, why should we bother to write letters to the editor?
That's a great question, Sara, and thanks for having me with you today. I'm excited to be with all of you. I think one of the main reasons why we write letters to the editor is because we care. We care about the communities that we live in, and engaged citizens make healthier and stronger communities. We often write to encourage our community and our leaders to improve in various areas, to make our world better for everyone. So I think that's the underlying value of why we would take the time to write a letter. But at Bread for the World, we often write letters to the editor on specific pieces of legislation that we care about, that we feel would improve our communities. So we know that members of Congress often track what's going on in their districts through local newspapers. And we know this is a great way to amplify the work that we're already doing on the ground in regards to specific issues. So we found this to be a really great tool for engaging our members of Congress.
Thank you. And next up, Connie, what are a few guidelines for writing letters to the editor? And Connie, you're muted. Need to unmute yourself. Thanks.
I did. Okay, I want to talk mainly about 3 points that I've had some success with in writing letters to the editor and in getting them printed. One factor seems to be like the newspapers and magazines like to see themselves quoted in your letter. I had a good example of that in the most recent letter that I did get published in the Enquirer. As the pandemic was, we thought, receding, and the Archbishop was telling us, as Catholics, of which I'm one, that we had to come back to Mass. And the tone of that bothered me a bit. And I wrote a letter saying, we have much to be grateful for that we can come back to Mass. Now, I quoted the Archbishop just in general. When my letter got printed, the Enquirer put a very specific quote in from their paper talking about the same thing. Actually, in doing it, they changed some of the grammar around a bit, and I didn't think it was quite as straightforward. But most magazines, papers do seem to like to see themselves quoted, so it's a good idea to do that, I think, when you can. Back in May of 16, by the way, I found my letters online, I haven't saved any of them. I did a better job of referencing, because I began my letter with, many thanks to Archbishop Schnurr, the Enquirer, and Mark Curnutte for last Sunday's cover story regarding human rights of all people. And at the end, I said that the Archbishop's words call us to the better parts of ourselves, and they use that in the headline. I have frequently found that they take a quote and put that into the headline for your letter. So good little phrases help in there also. A second thing that I think helps is if you make a personal reference. Now, you might not always want to do that, but identify yourself in a way that relates to the topic. An example I have of that, I wrote to America Magazine after they had an article encouraging students to ask questions, great, but they also said to the teachers, make sure you know the answers. So I wrote and said, that's not always necessary. Teachers are learning also, they should also be exploring. And they printed that letter. So other times you might want to identify by your role as a parent, whatever work you're in, some volunteer work you do, if it's, you know, relevant to the topic about what you're writing. And the third point I want to make, the final one here, is stay pleasant, polite, nice. Even if you're criticizing something, if you don't like the way something's going, if you don't agree with them, I think the old rule is say 3 good things first and then get into perhaps where you want to be critical. And in this same letter to American Magazine, I found I had done that. It was a good article. I praised it, praised his encouraging students to ask questions and good ones, and then went into, but it's not necessary that the teacher be sure of every answer. They can't be first. So I think that's always important. I had another letter went to the councilman, had a little public argument, and then one apologized, and I praised the one who had apologized and the other one for accepting the apology, because I thought that brought out the better part of both of them too. So those would just be 3 points that you might consider in writing letters.
Good points all. Thanks, Connie. So, Mark, can you give us some tips about best practices for wordsmithing a letter to the editor?
I think what's important is to remember that while you're very committed and engaged with this issue, that you don't get overly emotional. Part of the value of letters to the editor is you have an opportunity, if it's published, to inform people on an issue as to why it's important and why people should care. And there's an old line that is used in teaching high school journalism, is that the professionals write with information. So you write with information, not emotion. We're all those of us that care about social justice can get very emotional about it. And we've seen the downside and the hurt and the harm that's done to human beings. And we need to be careful not to open a vein and bleed on the paper. So we need to keep writing with information. And then, as I'm sure people that have been published will note, you need to keep, if your initial submission is under the word limit, and editors don't have to do a lot of tightening or editing, you have a better chance of having your letter published. So, you know, if there's a 250 word limit, stay under 250 words, because knowing the workload that editors have at newspapers now or magazines, you're going to be much better off and have a much better chance if you adhere to the rules, not just the word limit. I think another thing that was just brought up is that will help you stay focused on the issue is stay away from personal attacks or personal criticisms and stay focused on the issue. And so really, I think, and then the other piece, that while so many of these issues that we care about, whether it's hunger, poverty, capital punishment, we could go on and on, all these things that we care about have multiple tentacles to them, and we can go in multiple directions. You really have to pick a singular focus in 250 words, and that adds to the strength of your letter. And again, many people who write letters do have a professional relationship where you get to know the submission person at the newspaper or the magazine, even via email. And if you have an idea, and I think this is for the second round here, but an op-ed versus a letter, if you have something that you think can grow into a larger piece of maybe 700 words or 600 words, you know, it's best to discuss that ahead of time with the submissions editor, especially if that's someone who's published some of your letters. But again, I would just remember, stay focused on one issue, keep it as brief, following the directions or the guidelines that the publication sets out, and write with information, not emotion.
Thanks so much, Mark. So Nicole, if we have a letter to the editor published and we want to amplify our message on social media, do you have some tips for how to do that?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the groups that I work with are social action committees in local churches who have submitted letters to the editor. And I often encourage them, once they've had a letter published, to have people that are on their team and in their congregation to share that letter on social media. If that letter is directed at a specific local official or your member of Congress, to tag that member of Congress or local official so that their communications people are seeing that letter, and as it circulates and is passed on, you know, many, many times, they're seeing, wow, this is getting a lot of attention. People must really care about this issue. So it just helps to further amplify your message. If you're on Twitter, I encourage you to share that, you know, to tweet it, to tag your member of Congress on Twitter. We have often had good luck with members of Congress responding directly to us. I actually just had one of our leaders who frequently writes LTEs and op-eds get a letter published, and he was talking about the benefits of the child tax credit. And Senator Brown actually knew him as a constituent and wrote him a personal letter thanking him for engaging on the issue and talking about how important it was. And so he was quite excited to get that response, knowing that the senator had seen his writing and took the time to write that letter. And I would just say, if you are writing personal emails or letters to your member of Congress, it's always great to include a link to the publication, you know, where you were published, so they can see that and they can know that you've been engaged in your local community on the issue. So these are all just small things that you can do to just further amplify the message, so that it goes beyond just that one publication.
Thank you so much. So Tim, do we have any questions from the participants?
Right, so I invite anyone to submit questions through the Q&A. A couple questions here. The first is around the audience. Who are you writing towards? The general public who reads newspapers, or are you actually writing towards politicians or towards, in Connie's example, the archdiocese? Like, who is your audience you're writing towards when you're doing it?
I could take that one. So for Bread for the World, we're an advocacy organization. We're typically writing on hunger and poverty issues, and we most often are addressing an elected official. Now that doesn't mean that that's how you need to write. If you're passionate about a specific local issue, or maybe you're passionate about an issue that's going on in your local schools and you want school administrators to see that or teachers to see that, it really just depends on the issue that you're writing on. So I would definitely invite you to consider, who is it that I want to have an impact on with this letter? Am I writing to my neighbors? Am I writing to an elected official? Am I writing to a school official? And to really consider that before you start to write your letter, because that makes it that much more persuasive.
I'll add on there. I think when you write, again, you're obviously writing to a specific audience based on what that publication's readership is. If it's a specialty magazine, you're clearly reaching that audience, or you're attempting to reach that audience. But if you're, again, writing the Cincinnati Enquirer or the Dayton Daily News or Columbus Dispatch, you're reaching out to a general audience. And then the other thing that we know is that when you have the archdiocese or other companies or corporations or organizations who have media relations people and people who monitor, or politicians who have a media staff, they are going, one of the things they monitor to keep in touch with constituents are letters to the editor and op-eds that are submitted to newspapers. So politicians, organizations, companies, they all keep track of, even in our newspapers, diminished state that they are today compared to 20, 30 years ago, they still are a major central repository of thought and community ideas. And so just be aware that when you do submit a letter to the editor, it is going to be seen, especially, again, all of these people that you're trying to reach do have media tracking and media relations people who keep an eye on letters. So if you do get it published and you go through the work of getting it published, it will be seen.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just concentrate mostly on like letters to the Enquirer, the general audience that you spoke of. I can see where other things might be more specific, but yeah, whoever reads that publication.
So a question from Ed. If I'm not mistaken, the Enquirer makes writers of letters choose either online or print editions for publishing their letters. Is there a better or worse choice for a platform?
I've never had to make a choice. I have found that sometimes when I didn't think they had published one of my letters, someone will say to me, "Oh, I saw it online." So I thought they just put some of them online that they chose not to publish in the print magazine or newspaper, rather. I don't know, but that's been my experience. I've found some online that they did not publish in the paper.
Well,
But I didn't.
There's a great deal more space online. The space in print is, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, the space is very limited in print anymore. And so you're more likely going to see something go online. And going back to what Nicole said, then you have a better chance then of having a generated link that you can share in social media. So if you were to have a preference, my thought would be to go have it digitally, because then you can use it in multiple platforms.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm aware that there are that publications do have different setups in terms of online versus digital e-newspaper. But so I think it would probably be a good idea to reach out to the editor and find out, if you want to be sure to have it a certain way.
Thanks. This came up in our Advocacy 101 session, the previous session, that there is almost a hierarchy of impactfulness for advocacy approaches. So in your opinions, how impactful are letters to the editor versus other ways of getting your message out there and across?
At Bread for the World, we rate it as a very high form of engagement. We know that we have had a lot of success in amplifying our legislative asks through letters to the editor and op-eds. We often get responses directly from audiences. So each year we do an offering of letters campaign, and we invite parishes and local churches to write letters on a specific piece of legislation. And so we begin to do that throughout the year. And then we invite our advocates to then set up meetings with their members of Congress. And if their member of Congress isn't receptive to having a meeting on the issue, then we often invite them to start publishing LTEs or op-eds in their local community. And oftentimes, if that member hasn't been willing to meet with them face to face, and they've began to see some of that activity in their local papers, they'll often become open to having a meeting with us. It just applies a little bit more pressure. And I use pressure in a positive way, but they know that the issue is resonating with constituents, that constituents care about that. So it's a really creative way to engage with your member of Congress, but we found it to be very helpful. So yeah, we rate it pretty high at Bread for the World.
Thanks. Any other thoughts?
I would say then, Tim, that a letter to the editor is again, I wasn't there for the hierarchy session, but I think if all you're doing is a letter to the editor, it may be, again, that has, I think, some power, but I would again, I think it's multiple prongs of approach, whether it's a small public action or, these types of, when we teach in our social justice studies major, we teach movements, and there have to be multiple ways of calling attention to an issue, whether it's public action, journalism, letters to the editor, sit-ins, whatever, sit-ins at congressional offices, meetings. So there are public meetings, forums. So there's a whole array of ways to keep pressure on, to keep the issue in the forefront. And again, a lot of what you're doing, is educating people about an issue and the need of having this issue addressed. And again, using hunger and food insecurity, water issues as a main issue, those, we need to just keep informing people.
Yeah. Mark, I can't help wondering when you talk about the hunger issues, especially about keeping your passion or emotions under control, because we also hear the opposite, that it's not facts that move people, it's individual stories that they relate to, and they feel, oh, is that really happening to a real person? And so I'm just kind of wondering how that ties in with trying to make the letters strictly factual and not emotional.
Well, it's a very good question. I just think if you're limited to 200 words or 250 words, it's awfully hard to, I think it takes an awful lot of writing skill to, I know that even writing 10, 12-inch stories was very difficult to combine, the plight of a 2-year-old migrant girl from Guatemala with the larger context of what's going on. Or, when you're writing about Republicans who want to cut funding for WIC or SNAP, and then you're also then working with the Free Store, and you're talking to a family that's receiving that benefit. It's a challenge even in 1,000 words to pull all that together. So I think when you're talking today, as we are, about letters to the editor, what I mean by emotion is, I think we want to say, this has to stop. We need to do better. We can't continue to cut funding for food programs or public health, initiatives. I think an effective way to use something in the news right now, and if we've all seen these in the last couple of weeks, now look at the Delta variant and how absolutely harmful that is to children under 12 that haven't been able to get vaccinated. So, I think you don't need to go layer on a lot of emotion. You can use a couple statistics and say, whatever percentage of new cases are children under 12. I mean, that, I don't think we need to get real emotional. That kind of comes with inherent emotion. So again, I'm not saying not to be emotional, but don't just pour your emotion on. I think you have to write with facts and some level of measured control to get your point across. And I don't mean to dissuade emotion, because that's important as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All three of you, thank you. So I was hearing it's an important part of a larger approach, larger campaign to advocating for the issues that matter to you. Another question that came in is really just around submission format, and I guess that would depend on the publication, right? If how it's best to submit it, mail or email. And I imagine mostly email at this point, but I don't know that for sure. Another question that came up is sort of this idea, when we start advocating, people are often afraid of putting their own voice out there. They don't feel confident. They're not the expert in the issue. They're not but it is something that matters to them. Do you have any advice on just how to get started and how to find your voice?
I think, oh, go ahead, Connie.
Go ahead. I was going to say, starting with something like Bread for the World is a real help, because they give you so much information and you can trust where it's coming from and pick out what you want to use. So you don't have to be an expert just to be able to digest what you read and pick out what you want to use. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say working, of course, I would love it if you got involved with Bread for the World. But there are a lot of organizations that are doing great work that provide tools and resources. We often provide templates to help you get started. So sometimes just the actual, if you're not someone who does a lot of writing, just feeling like you're getting the format correct and that, the word count is going to be right and all of those kind of things can be intimidating. So we often provide templates that you can start out with, and then it helps you, you can add on and personalize it where that's appropriate and add a bit of your own, community twist to it. So that's really helpful. But more than anything, I love to just talk with people about their power as a constituent. Really, at the end of the day, your voice does matter, and members of Congress are paying attention. And unfortunately, they're paying attention to the loudest voices most of the time. And so when people of faith and people of conviction don't speak out because they're afraid they're not going to be heard, it really harms the causes that we care about most. So every voice has value and your voice has power. And I just encourage you to just step out. And if it's not something you're totally comfortable with, doing it on your own, to join a team, join an advocacy network in your parish or your congregation, or connect with an organizer at Bread for the World, and we can kind of help you with those steps along the way.
And I should add that our Ignatian Advocacy Team is in the coming weeks going to be developing a web page as part of the Active Discipleship Program, with links to all kinds of resources for advocacy skills. And, we also have the other social mission teams that where you can learn a lot if you get involved. So I encourage you to check that out.
And never forget, you're a voter and a taxpayer.
And since we've been talking about Bread for the World, I will add that we are doing our offering of letters on the 29th of this month. So you will have the chance to participate in that if you're a Bellarmine parishioner in just a couple weeks. Any closing thoughts? I know we're at the end of our time, so any closing thoughts from anyone?
Well, I think that voter and taxpayer bit was a great way to end.
And personally, it's always gratifying when they do accept and print a letter that kind of keeps you going for a while too.
Mm.
And occasionally I've gotten individual letters from people who read it. Usually nice, not always. None's ever been threatening, but some have been rather nastily disagreeing with something, but not too many of those, and not too many private letters, but they do come, and that's kind of nice too, to know somebody really read it. Or even when somebody tells you, well, I saw your letter and liked it, sort of thing.
I should add that Mark mentioned that there are different ways of advocacy besides writing letters to the editor. And so actually our next webinar in the fall will be about visibility events, which can include marches or rallies, but also prayer vigils and all kinds of ways of being visible to our elected officials and our fellow citizens. So be looking for that.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, Nicole, Connie, and Mark, thank you so much for your time and for being with us. This was recorded, so it will be on Bellarmine's YouTube page, and we will share it widely. We are grateful for your wisdom and for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.